I'm Aaron Mate with the Grayzone. The new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharra, aka Mohammed al-Jolani, is in New York for the UN General Assembly. Al-Sharra's trip is widely being described as the first visit by a Syrian president to the US in nearly 6 decades. That's one way to look at it. Another way is that it's the first visit by the founding leader of al-Qaeda in Syria since the US dropped a 10 million bounty on him last December. That's right. The founding leader of Syria's al-Qaeda franchise is now receiving a warm reception in the city that suffered the deadliest toll of al-Qaeda's 9/11 attack 24 years ago this month. How is that possible? Well, it's simple. Al-Sharaa, aka al-Jolani, led the successful coup of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad last year, the culmination of a more than decade-long dirty war led by the US and allies. As Jake Sullivan put it at the very outset of that war in early 2012, al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Well, because al-Qaeda was on our side in Syria, the US has given its founding leader a warm reception since he took over in Syria. Not just by taking al-Qaeda off of the terror list, but even heaping praise. Here, for example, is U.S. envoy Tom Barak.
You have an entity that was viewed as a guerrilla warfare group that had done a good job in Idlib, now takes over in Syria. By the way, they've been trustworthy, they've been thoughtful, they've been considered.
That's right. According to the Trump administration, al-Qaeda's ruling offshoot in Syria has been thoughtful and considered. And because the U.S. has given al-Qaeda a pass in Syria, this also means overlooking the atrocities committed under their watch. Since taking power, forces tied to the new government have committed sectarian violence against Syria's minority groups. Just to take the two most notorious examples of many. In March, hundreds, possibly thousands of Alawite civilians were massacred by government-tied forces in Syria's coastal regions. And then in July, hundreds more, mostly Druze civilians, were killed in Syria's Suweida region. Well, today we're going to hear from two members of these vulnerable communities, the Alawites and the Druze in Syria, about what is happening at the hands of a ruling al-Qaeda offshoot that we in the West helped put in power. Up first is Dr. Morhaf Ibrahim, head of the Alawite Association of the United States. Dr. Morhaf Ibrahim, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You were just in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill, trying to call attention to the deadly violence that minorities in Syria have been enduring ever since the fall of the Assad government last year. Talk about the message that you brought to Capitol Hill.
So we just tried to educate everybody at the Capitol Hill and some U.S. officials about the atrocities happening against minorities in Syria and the fact that the carte blanche behavior or policies of the American administration right now regarding Ahmed al-Sharra, the interim president of Syria, that he may change his color and that he may be okay in that region to govern Syria, which is a vital country. It's probably not okay. That the Ahmed al-Sharra is from a terrorist background. He's a terrorist organization kind of a guy. He was al-Qaeda before, and we try to let them know that the current behavior of this interim government in Syria is dangerous for the region, is dangerous, going to be dangerous for America. The concept of successful jihadist is extremely dangerous for everybody in the region and for the American interests. And we told them that probably at certain time there should be push for some kind of federalism or decentralization in Syria for these minorities to protect themselves, because the current behavior, the killing happening to Alawite, Druze, Christians, and at some point is going to be Kurds, is going to be dangerous for the whole region.
As you know well, the policy in Washington for more than a decade was regime change. It was to bring about exactly what we're seeing now. The U.S. knew that they were supporting an insurgency that was dominated by al-Qaeda, and that's why the former leader of al-Qaeda, al-Sharra, is now the leader of Syria. So given that this was the policy, given that the U.S. spent a lot of money on regime change and also imposed sanctions that helped collapse the government, what was the response to you in Washington now trying to call attention to the atrocities that the U.S. regime change policy helped lead to.
Well, nobody would like to have boots on the ground. I don't think there's any appetite in any uh, aspects of the U.S. government in D.C. About having boots on the ground in anywhere, especially in Syria. But we say that America, USA, is a very powerful country. Through sanctions and through other aspects, they can force the change of the behavior, and they can actually advocate for the change of the current system in Syria. I think very strong central government in Damascus is dangerous, and we try to tell everybody that you cannot have these jihadist Sunni background of Al Qaeda to govern the whole Syrian fabric. Syria is a very sophisticated country. It has the western region, which is mainly Alawites and Christians, and they are very educated. You have the southern Syria, which is Druze. You have the northeast Syria, which is Kurds in dominant area, and you can't just have somebody like Assad govern the whole Syria, because strong regime in Damascus is gonna, number one, affect the whole fabric in the region. I'll give you example. Christians in Syria were close to 800, 900,000 before 2011. Now they are less than 200,000, less than 1% of the population. And the Alawites gonna suffer the same issue. Druze are being massacred, killed, and they are under siege. And the Kurds gonna be disastrous if U.S. government give up on the Kurds. It's gonna be disastrous for them too. And they fought Al Qaeda with U.S. government. So what we try to tell everybody that U.S. government can support decentralized Syria. Nobody in the region is going to say no to that. Not Turkey, nobody. And I think there are other very strong regional powers supporting this kind of decentralization, such as maybe Israel, maybe Jordan. I think Jordan are in fear of this successful, strong jihadist regime in Damascus that's gonna probably affect the current secular regime in Jordan. So it's very healthy for everybody to move towards decentralization and to change this kind of constitution, like the constitution that established by al-Sharra right now. He made himself the judge, the jury, and the police officer. That's not sustainable, and that's not healthy for everybody in the region.
Let's talk about some specific atrocities that have been documented against the Alawites of Syria since the fall of Assad. Reuters just came out with an article called "How Syrian Forces Emptied an Alawite Suburb. X means stay, O means go." And they're reporting on this Damascus suburb of al-Samaria, which was home to about 22,000 people. Now it's home to about 3,000 people after Syrian forces under the new government, under the al-Qaeda offshoot controlled government, went to al-Samaria and painted X's and O's on homes. And X means stay, O means go. And that reduced the population from 22,000 down to 3,000. What do you know about what happened here?
So let me start with the fall of the Assad regime. After the fall of the Assad regime on December 8, 2024, killings against Alawites and minorities, Druze, Christians, start happening on smaller scale until March 7. March 7, we counted close to 8,000 being killed. Other reports said probably close to 2,000 being killed just because of being Alawites. The kidnapping of women, as you know, you've seen reports from the Amnesty International, from the UN, and from the Reuters reported that multiple Alawite women kidnapped and sold as sex slaves. We counted 55 with interviews, actually, with the families, 55 Alawite women, and we counted that. There are the unlawfully detained prisoners. They are, a lot of them actually being killed, close to 10,000 people. Quote unquote, they are regime remnants, no trials, nobody knows where they are right now. and then the massacres on July 13 against the Druze and the siege against the Druze. Now, we as Alawite, as the Alawite Association of the United States, AAUS, documented 19 villages under what we call ethnic cleansing. The last one of them is Somalia. There are two other places, Muaddamiye and Mazis Tautmanin. Whoever knows Damascus knows that these areas are suburbs of Damascus. They are Alawites, mainly Alawites. They've been ethnically cleansed. I'll tell you more than that. When massacres happened on March 7, there are certain places in Banyas, for instance, marked as Alawites, and other places marked as Sunni, and other places marked as Christians. So if you're Alawite, your house is gonna get burned. So that's as simple as it is. I've probably you've seen the massacres in the southern Syria in Druze areas. They start asking people, "Are you Druze or Sunni? Are you Druze or Sunni? Are you Druze or Sunni?" And then one of them said, I'm Syrian. I'm Syrian. I'm Druze." Then they killed him. It's just heartbreaking. It's just uh, established ethnic cleansing behavior of this current regime. And I don't think the United States of America should just stay silent.
You mentioned that your group has documented more than 50 women who have been kidnapped and forced to become sex slaves. I mean, tell us more about this, and where is the global outcry for this? I mean, there's been a lot of reports about this, but you don't see this being a major topic of discussion.
55 women. We tried to send these files to US officials, Department of State, to UN. We've sent it to multiple US congressmen, congresswomen, and we just trying on this kind of scale to educate people that this current regime should not stay, and this current regime is going to be dangerous for everybody. And again, this successful jihadist ideology that, if you're jihadist and you can fight in the name of Islam to publish Islam and to convert everybody to become Muslim, that's not going to be healthy for anybody. Uh, there are obviously certain names you cannot just talk about them. This is why in secrecy we're trying to advocate and we're trying to educate people about these 55 women, because a bunch of them are actually inside Syria, and everything was documented with interviews with the victims, some of them, and some of them actually families of the victims.
It was just the 24th anniversary of 9/11 when Al Qaeda attacked the U.S. And the day afterwards, the day after the anniversary, there was a meeting in Damascus between the head of U.S. CENTCOM, Brad Cooper, and
Right.
al-Sharra, the new leader of Syria, who's the founding leader of Al Qaeda in Syria. What kind of a message does this send? If a top U.S. military leader is meeting with the former leader of Al Qaeda in Syria, especially just one day after the U.S. marks the anniversary of 9/11.
I would leave this to the victims of 9/11 and to the U.S. Military who were killed in Iraq defending this great country, or Afghanistan. That the Jolani guy has American blood on his hands, and I don't think that was a reasonable decision by the U.S. administration to have this kind of engagement, this level of engagement with Jolani.
If you're a Alawite family, what is daily life like now versus before the fall of the government? I mean, how much of a security threat does one face every single day, and how are people grappling with the threat of things like having women being kidnapped for sex slaves, or worse, being killed?
I'll tell you this: multiple of my cousins and the people I know in Syria, they don't send their kids to school anymore because of the fear of being kidnapped. You just understand right now. We can understand that that's going to create an issue for the future of these people and the education for these people. Alawites are being under siege right now, and they are suffering financially. They are in fear of, as we said, being kidnapped and killed. Every day, we document between 2 to 3, sometimes 4, sometimes 10, sometimes 12, being just killed because of the fact they are Alawites. And if you really think about it, moving forward, that's gonna cripple their ability to get education, to be involved in the society, to be able to work. I know a lot of families are really dependent on minimal ways of living right now because they cannot just be engaged in the fabric of the areas around them because of fear of being kidnapped and killed. So it's just it's a dire situation for Alawites, and I don't think it's sustainable. This is why we're really asking for decentralization, federal government. We said the following. I told the officials at the U.S. Department, I told them, hey, listen, if the security forces around the Alawite regions are from Alawites, I don't think any kidnapping for women would happen. But according to Reuters report that the kidnapped women actually went through security checks of the Ahmed al-Sharra government, its security forces, and the Department of Defense for Ahmed al-Sharra, and they told them, okay, fine, God bless you, go forward. Go forward. In other words, they really covered up for the kidnapping of Alawite women, and this is part of the atrocities that the Alawites have been suffering from.
What you will hear from supporters of regime change in Syria is that, well, the Alawite community, that they were complicit in the crimes of the Assad government and the repression that occurred under Assad's rule. Here, for example, is Lena Sinjab. She's a Syrian reporter for the BBC, and she was on Democracy Now! Earlier this year after the successful regime change in Syria. And this is what she said about the Alawite community in Syria. I want to get your response.
Agenda behind, because the Alawite community are worried about prosecution. Most of the Alawite community are, supportive of President Assad or former President Assad, and they had contributed or been part of the crackdown, the brutal crackdown on the Syrians. Arrest, torture, imprison, and killing. So they will be prosecuted, and that's why they are, out and about trying to put pressure so there will be a general amnesty on the Alawite community. This is something that is impossible to happen because the families of those who died in prison, the families of those who were bombed and, tortured to death or disappeared, they need justice. They need answers about what happened to their family members, and there is no way for peace and stability to happen in Syria without a prosecution, without a legal system that will hold those who have blood on their hands accountable for the sake of reconciliation in the country.
I wanted to ask you,
so what's your response to that? She's basically saying that most of the Alawite community was involved in the crackdown, the brutal crackdown on Syrians by the Syrian government throughout the years of the Dirty War.
According to the UN investigation report that happened after the massacres against Alawites on March 7, some of the victims were less than 1 year old. So these people were, these babies were part of the regime and involved in the atrocities of the Assad regime against people. How about the 55 women that we documented, some of them 16, 17, or 18 years old? How about during the massacre against Alawites on March 7, 2025, they separated women from men and they killed them just based on their identity. And some of these women actually were killed because they were trying to protect their kids, their sons. So these people are part of the Assad regime, and they are implicit in the atrocities against Syrians with the Assad regime. 85% of the Assad regime fighters were from the Sunni Kurds, from the Druze and Christians. So the Assad regime was a dictatorship. That it was not an Alawite regime. Assad was Alawite himself. He was married to a Sunni lady. The main security forces around him, the Minister of Defense was Sunni. His Ali Mamluk, his right hand security guy is Sunni. Bunch of people around him were Sunni. So it was not really an Alawite or was Alawite atrocities. It was just dictatorship regime, bad regime, and linking. Yeah, I'm so unhappy about this kind of media and this kind of news, because the same news and the same media reporters trying to link Alawites with the atrocities of the Assad regime are really being affecting what's going on right now on the ground. The Assad regime was dictatorship. The current regime is dictatorship. Alawites have nothing to do and had nothing to do with the Assad regime. It was dictatorship. It was military regime. It was al-Ba'as, bad regime similar to Saddam Hussein, and the regime did what it had to do at that time to protect itself. It has nothing to do with the Alawites, and I'm so sorry to hear stuff like that, because it's really affecting the the survival of the Alawites in the region, because considering the Alawites are Fulul Nizam or remnants of the Assad regime, it's really affecting their survival in the region, and I'm so sorry to hear stuff like that, because that's what's really uh, making the killing of Alawites being uneasy. Guess what? Look what happened to the Druze. Druze were not Assad was not a Druze guy. They killed Druze because they are different. So the whole issue of killing right now in Syria is just some uh, radical Sunni people, part of this current Sunni regime, trying to have a Sunni dominance by killing and ethnic cleansing of all other minorities.
And I have to say, if we're going to talk about the atrocities that the Assad government carried out during the Dirty War, it was because they were fighting back against one of the most well-armed insurgencies in history that was dominated by people like al-Qaeda that were killing minorities, including Alawites, Druze, and Christians. And when you have an al-Qaeda dominated insurgency and it's very well funded, you're going to have a lot of killing. So the answer was to stop the Dirty War, but the policy was regime change. And where the regime change was the product of states like the US and the UK. And this is a reporter from the BBC, which is a arm of the UK government that was a cheerleader for the Dirty War. And that's really important context to understand here as you listen to this clip. And I want to play one more from her. This is BBC reporter Lena Sinjab, also on the progressive show Democracy Now!, talking more about Alawites and basically saying that they're all essentially tools of Iran.
And its affiliated militia, whether in Iraq or in Lebanon from Hezbollah or the Shiite militias in Iraq, they're worried about them, interfering in the society, causing, disruption and causing instability. Especially that many of the Alawites and the Shia in Syria have always been affiliated to foreign powers like in Iran, and they are worried that this is going to continue.
Lena Sinjab, we thank you so much for being with us.
So the claim there is that most of the Alawites and the Shia are affiliated with Iran.
That's not accurate. Alawites are very educated, very secular people, and they really not religious at all. The regime was using its ties with Hezbollah and with Iran to protect itself. It was not really an Alawite issue to have some kind of alliance between the previous regime and these forces. And there's really no ties between Alawites and Hezbollah or Alawites and Iran. And if you look at the behavior of Alawites right now, they are very well educated, westernized kind of people. They are at the coastal area of Syria, most of them, some of them in around Damascus, some of them around Homs, some of them around Hama, but all of them are educated. They're really not, they're not religious people, and there's really no relationship or ties between Alawite themselves. And this is part of the confusion that the previous regime, being Bashar Assad being an Alawite himself, had his ties with Iran to protect itself, had its ties with Hezbollah to protect itself. Look at the Alawites in Lebanon right now. They have nothing to do with the Hezbollah forces at all. So we really try to educate everybody that linking Alawites to outside forces such as Iran or even Russia or Hezbollah is really a mistake, and that should change. There's a huge difference between linking Al Qaeda or linking HTS or al-Jolani himself with the Turkish intelligence and the help that he got from Turkish intelligence as well and Turkish forces. But the Alawites themselves, they are peaceful people. They have nothing to do with all these agendas in the Middle East against, God forbid, Israel or any other forces. They really want to live in peace and they want to govern themselves. And this is why, decentralization is going to be the way to go. If these kind of, you generalizing, saying all Alawites or most of Alawites are Fulul Nizam or remnants of the Assad regime, or they really would like to have ties with Hezbollah or Iran, it's just a huge mistake. And it's a lethal mistake because it's really affecting the existence of these people.
Dr. Mohaf Ibrahim, we're going to wrap. Any last message you want to leave us with?
I would really like to educate everybody at the Alawite about the Alawite issue. And I would like everybody to know that the Alawites are not Fulul Nizam. Alawites are very peaceful people. They want to really live in dignity. They want to live in dignity. They want to really protect a good future for their kids and their historic land in Syria. This is why I would like to encourage everybody to at least force the U.S. government or the Department of State of the Congress to help the Alawite cause by supporting decentralization of Syria.
Dr. Mohaf Ibrahim, head of the Alawite Association of the United States, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was Dr. Mohaf Ibrahim, head of the Alawite Association of the United States. Now we hear from Hiba Jarmakani. She is a Druze Syrian American, originally from Suweida province in Syria. Hiba Jarmakani, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
There was an outbreak of sectarian violence in Suweida province, where you're from, in Syria in July. And this unleashed massacres of your people, the Druze. Talk to us about what happened.
So, before we get into the events of what happened in July, I think it's important that we talk about the events leading up to that. So, even before we had the violence break out against the Druze community, in April, we had a man by the name of Enes Habra who released a deepfake video claiming that there were important Druze people inciting violent talk against the Prophet Muhammad. And this caused a lot of people online to be up in arms, wanting to attack the Druze community. And later, the Ministry of Interior, so the Syrian government itself, released a statement saying this was a deepfake video, this isn't real. But at that point, we had people committing violence in Damascus, in Aleppo, in Homs against Druze students, some of which were my family members who had to quickly flee the area. Then after that, there was a man by the name of Mahran el-Salami, and he was abducted actually. He's a Druze man that was abducted and killed. And so after a series of these small but relevant outbreaks of violence, you had Druze men from al-Suweida province, from smaller villages within the al-Suweida province, going to the borders of al-Suweida to defend against any attacks because they were worried that this was going to continue it was going to reach the province, things were going to escalate. During that, they were actually ambushed by ISIS militants. And we know they were ISIS militants because a lot of the men that showed up on the borders of Suweida and ambushed Druze men were wearing insignia on their clothing, representative of ISIS militancy. We had also seen these faces back in March, actually, in the coastal areas of Syria. And that largely wasn't talked about in media. In March, there were over 1,000 people killed in the coastal areas of Syria. A lot of people called it a campaign of genocide, a campaign of ethnic cleansing, because it was directed at the Alawites. And, people tried to claim that it was factions from the previous government, but there are videos all over the internet that show innocent civilians being mass executed, burning, looting, all of which continues to today. There are arson fires being set up in Homs, the outer skirts of Homs. They're setting fires to people's homes, looting. So all of this is sort of the context leading up to what happened in July. And so going back to that massacre, where the ISIS militants ambushed the Druze Suweida men, I actually, during that, my cousin's husband lost his life. He was killed by ISIS militants, and they actually sent his son images of them desecrating his body, and basically warning him and threatening him. Fast forward to the events of July. Those broke out because there was where Suweida is situated, there's one road leading out to Damascus. On the road to Damascus from Suweida, there are several checkpoints. These checkpoints are manned by the Syrian government alongside Bedouin tribes. So what happened is we had a man, in order for you to get any of your material that you need for your shops, you have to go to Damascus. So a local grocer went to Damascus to get products for his store, and he was robbed at a checkpoint, humiliated, and abused. And these were instances that had been occurring since the fall of the Assad government. After that, the Druze have now been subjected to several instances of violence. So what they did is they kidnapped a group of people from the Bedouin tribes to leverage that in order to return this man's products and return his property to him. As a result of that, then the Bedouin tribes were also kidnapping members of the Druze community. And eventually, this escalated into a full-on clash between the two groups. That's when you have people claiming that the Syrian government stepped in to restore peace between these two groups. That operates under the assumption that the Syrian government is a peacekeeping force to begin with. When they were sent in, it actually they came after a meeting had happened in Baku with the ambassador, Thomas Barak, I believe is his name, and Netanyahu and the Syrian government.
Barak is the ambassador to Turkey, but he's been spending a lot of time in Syria.
Right. So they had just met in Baku, and in the aftermath of that, the president has since made statements that he had assumed that at that meeting he was given the green light to go in and attack these groups that were fighting each other. And at this point, the Druze men in al-Suweida have seen massacres happening on the coast. They've been subjected to humiliation, looting, etc. So they're not wanting to give up their arms, because if you see your government attacking its own people, you want to be able to protect yourself. And no such similar calls were made for the Bedouin tribes that were also armed. Nobody was demanding for them to give up their weapons. And it's important to note that the Druze spiritual leader at this point in time had come out and said, "We, the Druze, do not want to secede from Syria. We want a fair constitution. We want a fair election. We want peace and dignity." He was not calling for separation from the state at this point. None of those calls were answered. And then you have the Syrian government, supposedly a peacekeeping force, coming in with the full force of its military on the al-Suweida government. And in the aftermath of that clash, there were public executions, summary executions. There are videos out there. One that particularly circulated that you can see is the 3 students being forced to jump from the balcony while they were shot at. You had young girls being raped, being kidnapped, homes looted, a bunch of our men, their mustaches cut, and a lot of these people in these videos are wearing and they found government IDs on their persons, the ones that they were able to capture, and ISIS insignia. And in addition to that, a lot of these men in these videos that were later captured admitted that we were told by the government to come in and kill as many people as we could. And I think they were given $200, $300 to do so. There's a video of an old Druze man. The government forces ask him, "What are you?" He says, "I'm Syrian." And they ask further, "What's your affiliation?" He says, "I'm Druze." They don't give him any more time. Immediately, he's shot dead as soon as he responds that he's Druze. It was a very, very bloody, violent, and I wouldn't even call it a clash, because it was a campaign of ethnic cleansing. You're deliberately targeting a minority simply for being Druze, and there's evidence after evidence that this took place. And like I said, a lot of these people, when they were able to capture the Druze fighters, when they were able to capture some of these men, they admitted to working for the government, and they also admit that they were at times told to dress up as Bedouin and pretend that they were Bedouin to come in and instigate this violence.
The executions that happened in the hospital in Suweida, that also was among the atrocities that got some international attention. Can you talk about what happened there?
Yeah, so at the time, a lot of people, in moments of crisis, and we've seen this in Gaza too, in moments of crisis, people go to the hospital for refuge. They think it's a safe space. So a lot of Druze people that got injured while trying to fight off these militants, went to the hospital. And eventually what happened is the militants then made it to the hospital. They broke into the hospital. There's video footage of this. I think they take out the director. They have the director lead them to a main area where you sort of see one of the doctors they gather them all in an area. You see one of the doctors trying to tell them, like, "We just have wounded here." He tries to push off the fighter, and then he gets shot then and there. And that hospital becomes a target of a bombing campaign, where all of the wounded were. So it turns into a massacre very quickly.
And the videos that circulated of Druze men having their mustaches plucked and forcibly shaved. Talk about that and the significance that the mustache plays in Druze culture.
So For Druze men, they've historically been known as a warrior class, and we got this sort of moniker as being warriors and very prideful back since probably the Great Syrian Revolt that happened in 1925, where Druze men fought and revolted against the French at the time. And since then, even though that revolt was brutally crushed, we were seen as a warrior class. And so the significance of the mustache goes back even to that era of time where you had these men that the growing of the mustache resembles you becoming a man and becoming a warrior almost. And our most respected leaders in our community, the Druze sheikhs, they have these mustaches. And so to cut the mustache of the Druze men is almost like a slight against not only the religion, because you're cutting the mustache of our spiritual leaders, of the people most respected in the Druze religion, because in order to become a sheikh in the Druze religion, you have to fully embrace your religion, and you're given an elevated knowledge of the religion itself. So when these mustaches are cut, you're not only is it a slight against their religion, but it's also a slight against their manhood and their pride, which for Druze people is above all else. We're a very prideful minority.
You collected testimony from residents of Suweida, from a number of people. What stood out to you in the accounts that you got?
What stood out to me the most is probably that it shook the fabric of trust that Syria has had historically. Syria historically has been a place of true coexistence between minorities, whether you're Christian, you're Alawite, Shia, Druze. We've lived side by side for many years. Our neighbors, you don't ask, what is your denomination? I mean, even within my family, I grew up being told that I was Muslim because the Druze faith developed out of Islam. So I grew up with the notion that you're Muslim, you're Syrian, you're Arab first. And so they had neighboring provinces coming to attack them, and calls all across Syria by imams, by important people circulating on the internet calling for violence against the Druze minority simply for being Druze. And so you get a populace, you get survivors that are truly now distrustful and are shaken to their core, which takes away this fabric that existed for such a long time of being Syrian. There is now no longer a Syrian national identity because the foundation for that is trust, and that trust has now eroded, and eroded in the most heinous of ways. You know, once you now fear for your family's safety, you see your people getting called pigs. It's one thing to call us pigs in English, but it's another thing entirely when it's your countrymen doing it in your native language. It destroys something inherent that was in all of us, of this pride of being Syrian.
Prior to Assad being overthrown, critics of the regime change war there, which cost the U.S. and its allies a lot of money, they spent billions of dollars arming an insurgency that they knew was dominated by al-Qaeda with weapons. Criticism of the regime change operation would be met with claims like, listen to Syrian voices. This is what Syrians want. And what I and others would argue is that Syria is not a monolith. Like every country, there's no unified voice. And I'm just curious, what is your reaction to this characterization of most Syrians as wanting regime change in Syria and supporting the insurgency led by al-Qaeda that carried?
I mean, I think it's completely false. It's to claim most Syrians, like you said, Syrians are not a monolith. We all have our unique experiences. Even within the Druze community itself, you had conflicting voices. Some people that wanted Assad gone, and some people that didn't, which resulted in the Druze having a very interesting relationship with the previous government that sort of balanced on kind of a neutrality of not being completely against the previous government and also not fully supporting it either. You had defectors within the Druze community that didn't want to join and fight in the Syrian army at that time, and you had people that were still serving and proud to serve. So I'd say in any town in Syria, you could find both opinions. There was never most Syrians. And I think the idea that most Syrians comes from the US's longstanding foreign policy of trying to create this image in countries that they're bringing democratization and the Syrian voice is one voice and we're all calling for the same thing. They've done this in many countries. Unfortunately, with Syria, it became so convoluted with all of these different groups and countries having involvement in that war, which I wouldn't even characterize as a civil war, um, that it created mixed messages. And it's one of those few examples where even on the left and even in traditionally liberal media, such as like Democracy Now!, you had people reporting that very, very one voice, this is a dictator, we need to remove him. Anything that goes contrary to that messaging, oh, you're an Assadist, you love dictators, which was not the case. A lot of us that were standing against that and didn't want foreign involvement in Syria was precisely fearing what has transpired. Now you have a government that is run by a man that was the head of al-Qaeda in Syria and then worked as a prominent leader in ISIS in Jabhat al-Nusra that later became Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, that was designated as a terrorist organization by the US. He had a bounty on his head by the US that was later lifted when suddenly he was wearing suits and no longer a terrorist. And he's incorporated all of these extremist elements into his defense ministry. And in addition to that, we have to look at the context of Syria that has been a geopolitically important country since its inception, since it gained independence. I mean, even in the 1940s, you had the US already injecting money into the country through the Muslim Brotherhood to orchestrate coups against non-aligned governments that weren't pro-Western. And the claim was that they were communist, that we needed to remove these leaders from Syria because they're pro-communist or they're pro-Soviet Russia. But the truth is, there was no strong communist leadership in Syria at that time. And the only reason we aligned ourselves with the Soviets at that time was because we saw the threat of the West. We were given no other choice. And you had a couple things going on in the 40s and 50s. I mean, in the 50s, Ben Gurion developed his doctrine of periphery, where he utilized, in order to combat pan-Arab nationalism, he utilized non-Arab allies or ethnic minorities to turn public opinion and raise arms against the predominant power at the time. And in the 40s and in the 50s, you had the recently successful coup in Iran, orchestrated by the CIA, and they thought that they could do the same in Syria. And you had all these different people trying to overthrow the government of Syria, which resulted in a series of successive coups, one after the other, until we had a period of political stability under Hafez al-Assad. So that's the context in which we're looking at Syria. I mean, billions of dollars injected into a country to try and turn it more pro-West.
On top of crippling sanctions that further destroyed the economy, made it impossible to rebuild, and a U.S. military occupation that plundered Syria's oil and wheat. So, it's no wonder that regime change finally succeeded after destroying a country, stealing its resources, and preventing it from rebuilding. And I have to say, on the issue of media, progressive media, you mentioned Democracy Now! And their very one-sided coverage. What I find which is really notable and unfortunate is that many of the outlets that cheerleaded regime change have ignored the consequences, have ignored, for example, the massacres against the Druze. I don't think Democracy Now! Has even covered that in a segment. And I think there's a responsibility there to at least cover the atrocities that bad media coverage helps set the stage for. That's just my opinion. But turning back to the present moment, let's talk about the role of Israel here.
Mm-hmm.
Israel took credit for regime change. Netanyahu, right after Assad fled, gave a speech saying, this was largely a result of our actions. And it's true that Israel bombed Syria hundreds of times throughout the regime change war. It armed insurgents, and it was a partner of the U.S. In trying to oust Assad. So Netanyahu, I think, was accurately taking some of the credit. But what has happened since? Israel's bombed the government that it helped install in power, including after the atrocities against the Druze. And Israel's claimed that it was intervening to help the Druze. And there are Druze inside of Israel who advocated this, who wanted Israeli intervention. So talk to us about what's going on there.
So again, this is part of what makes Syria so complicated, because you have Israeli Druze, you have Lebanese Druze, you have Syrian Druze, and it goes back to this idea that none of it is a monolith. So the relationship with Israel is a bit complicated. Like you mentioned, Israel helped install the current government. You had insurgents being treated in Israeli hospitals. Israel then, in the aftermath of Assad leaving, completely crippled the country's defenses. And during that time, you had those insurgents raising Israeli flags. Now, the Druze community is getting the criticism because you've seen some Druze people in Syria now carrying the Israeli flag. Well, part of that is because when you get a situation where your people and your government has slaughtered you, that has just occurred, there's no denying it, and you can't trust the people around you, you're under a siege, right? No, barely any goods, gas, anything like that are entering the Suweida province. They've been subjected to humiliation, torture, rape, kidnappings. They've now been backed up into a corner. What are we meant to do? Do we trust our government that just slaughtered us, or do we look elsewhere? It's a lot of the reason why people, even Syrians in America, openly welcomed the ouster of Bashar, because you hope that what you don't know will be better than what you do know. And like you said, in the aftermath of that, a lot of these same people that celebrated haven't come out and said anything about the slaughter of minorities. But with Israel specifically, there's the Druze in the Golan Heights, which a large majority of them have rejected Israeli citizenship. Now, I'm not going to come out and claim that it's all of them. There are Druze people that have taken up Israeli citizenship and fight for Israel's military. But a large majority of the Druze in the Golan Heights reject Israeli citizenship. But those that do serve in the Israeli military do have some leverage. They're able to come to Israel while all of this is happening and say, if you don't come into the defense of the Druze in Syria, we will make a problem for you. Israel is fighting a war of aggression against multiple countries at once. And a large part of their military comes from their reserves. So they can't really afford to have that happening internally. within their own military system. So that's one reason why they came in defense of the Druze in Syria. The other reason, again, goes back to what is now being called the reverse doctrine of periphery, where it plays right into the hands of Israel to create this dynamic of division between the Syrian Druze and other minorities against the government, because they can benefit from this destabilization. They can work with the government in Syria while also pretending to aid these minorities and have them call for seceding from the country. And the Jewish people are not stupid. I mean, they know this. But again, it comes down to this idea that, okay, well, if I can't put food on my table because my country and my government is not providing me with food, I mean, the Jewish people in Syria don't have jobs right now. Barely any aid is coming in, and they're surrounded on all fronts. It's either goods come in from Syria or they come in from Jordan. So what are they meant to do? I mean, they've been put in a difficult position here. It's about survival. It's about trying to make sure your family lives at the end of the day.
Hey, but we are going to wrap. Any last comments you want to leave us with?
I just want to emphasize that the situation in Suweida province is very dire. And people will be out of food and jobless, and there's no security. And so I want to emphasize that reporting on this issue, and making sure that we highlight these voices is very important, not only to me personally and my family, but to Syria as a whole. I mean, nobody wants to see it become another situation that has happened like other countries that have experienced American interventionism and other such things. So the propaganda around what's happening in Syria is very convoluted, but I urge everyone to look more into it rather than just taking everything for face value.
Hiba Jamarkani, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron.